Your share of the inheritance went to the launch of your sister's brand, my parents admitted casually. Consider it your charitable contribution to our peace of mind. My fork hit the porcelain plate with a sharp, ugly clatter that echoed through the vaulted dining room. I looked at my mother, who was calmly sipping a vintage Chardonnay, and then at my father, who was cutting his steak with the surgical precision of a man who had never known a day of true labor. Across from me, my younger sister Madison didn't even look up from her phone. She was busy scrolling through mood boards for her new lifestyle label, Ethereal Soul. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. That money, nearly $300,000 left to me by my grandmother, wasn't just a number on a screen. It was my exit strategy. It was the down payment for the small accounting firm I wanted to buy in San Francisco, my chance to finally stop working 80-hour weeks for partners who didn't know my name. I had earned my degree on scholarships and night shifts, while Madison had found herself on 3 different continents, all on my parents' dime. That wasn't yours to give, I said, my voice trembling with a cocktail of rage and disbelief. Grandma left that specifically to me in her will. It was in a trust. My father finally looked at me, his eyes as cold as the marble countertops. The trust had a management clause, Aaron. We exercised it. Your sister has a vision, a real chance to build something. You're a CPA. You're stable. You don't need a windfall to survive, but Madison needs this to start her life. We did it for the family. We didn't want the stress of her constantly asking for loans. Now we have peace. You should be happy for her. The peace they spoke of was a lie. It was the price of my silence and my compliance. Madison finally looked up, flashing a smile that was as artificial as her lip fillers. Don't be so dramatic, Aaron. Once Ethereal Soul goes public, I'll probably pay you back. It's an investment in us. I had a choice to make right there, between the appetizers and the main course. I could swallow the insult, smile, and remain the reliable daughter, the one who always sacrificed so Madison could shine. Or I could burn the table down. I want it back, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. Every cent. By Monday, or I'm calling a lawyer. My mother's glass hit the table. You wouldn't dare. You'd embarrass us over money? After everything we've given you? You haven't given me anything since I was 18, I retorted. I stood up to leave, but as I reached the door, my father threw a final poisoned barb. Go ahead, call a lawyer. But remember, Aaron, I'm the one who sits on the board of the firm you're trying to buy. One word from me, and that deal vanishes. Sit down, shut up, and be the daughter we raised you to be. I didn't sit down. I walked out into the cool San Francisco fog, but the choice I made that night triggered a landslide I wasn't prepared for. I thought the law would be on my side, but I had underestimated the sheer, calculated cruelty of my own blood. By Monday morning, my world began to disintegrate. When I arrived at my office, my keycard didn't work. Security escorted me to the HR department, where my boss sat with a grim expression. We received some disturbing information, Aaron, he said, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside were printouts of emails I had supposedly sent. Vicious, incoherent messages addressed to my parents and Madison, carefully crafted to portray me as unstable, hostile, and professionally unreliable. I didn't write these, I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. This is a fabrication. My father is trying to— Your father called us, Aaron, my boss interrupted. He's concerned about your mental decline. He mentioned the stress of the inheritance has caused a psychotic break. Given your access to sensitive client financials, we can't take the risk. You're being placed on indefinite administrative leave. We suggest you seek professional help. The fall was rapid and terrifying. Within 48 hours, I was a pariah. Madison had taken to her Instagram stories, sobbing to her 500,000 followers about her unstable sister who was trying to extort her for her hard-earned business capital. The comments were a bloodbath. Strangers called me a bitter hag and a leech. My bank accounts were frozen next. My father had used his connections to flag my accounts for suspicious activity, claiming I was being investigated for embezzlement within the family trust. I was sitting in my dark apartment, staring at a notice of eviction because my rent check had bounced, when the final blow landed. I received a thick envelope in the mail. It wasn't from a lawyer I had hired. It was from my parents' legal team. They weren't just taking the inheritance. They were suing me for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. But the kicker was at the very back of the packet. A document I had allegedly signed 2 years ago, granting my father full power of attorney over my financial affairs in the event of emotional incapacity. The signature was a perfect forgery. I looked at the date. It was the day of my grandmother's funeral. While I was weeping over her casket, they were preparing the ink to erase my future. I was broke, jobless, and legally shackled to the very people who had robbed me. I felt the walls of my studio apartment closing in, the silence of the room amplified by the realization that I was utterly alone. I had tried to fight with honor, and it had cost me everything. Desperation has a way of sharpening the mind. For 3 weeks, I lived on ramen and spite, spending every waking hour at the public library, using their computers to dig into the digital footprint of Ethereal Soul. If I was going down, I was going to understand exactly what I was being sacrificed for. My father had always been a man of shadows. His construction company, Turner Development, had been struggling for years, but somehow they always maintained their Palo Alto lifestyle. As I combed through public filings and leaked tax documents, a pattern began to emerge. Madison's brand wasn't just a vanity project, it was a vacuum. The brand had no actual warehouse. It had no design team. Every original piece Madison posted on her feed was a white-labeled garment from a cheap factory in overseas, marked up 5,000%. But that wasn't the shock. The shock was the cash flow. Ethereal Soul was reporting millions in private consultations and membership tiers that didn't exist. I sat back, my eyes stinging from the blue light of the monitor. My parents hadn't just stolen my inheritance to give Madison a hobby. They had used my name, my social security number, and my clean professional record to set up the holding company for Ethereal Soul. I wasn't just a charitable contributor. On paper, I was the chief financial officer. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My father was washing money from his failing construction contracts, money that should have gone to city taxes and union pensions, through Madison's fake fashion brand. And he had put my name on the ledger. If the IRS ever looked at Ethereal Soul, they wouldn't see my father or Madison. They would see Aaron Turner, the CPA, the unstable daughter who had mismanaged the funds. I felt a brief surge of hope. This was it. I had the leverage. I called my father, my hand shaking as I held the phone. "I know about the shell company, Dad," I said, my voice cracking. "I know Ethereal Soul is a laundromat for Turner Development. Give me my money, clear my name, and I'll walk away. I won't say a word." There was a long silence on the other end, then a soft, chilling chuckle. "Aaron, you really are your father's daughter, always looking for the ledger. But you missed one thing." "What's that?" "Check the latest filing, sweetheart, the one from this morning." I refreshed the page on the Secretary of State's website. My heart stopped. A new document had been uploaded. It was a confession of financial mismanagement signed by me, notarized by the same crooked lawyer who had forged the power of attorney. It detailed how I, Aaron Turner, had used Ethereal Soul to embezzle funds from my parents to cover my gambling debts. "If you go to the authorities," my father said, his voice smooth and paternal, "you aren't the whistleblower. You're the lead defendant. I have the paper trail to prove it. We didn't just take your money, Aaron. We took your life. Now be a good girl and stop calling. We have a launch party to prepare for." He hung up. I was in the lowest pit of my existence. I had handed him the map to my own execution. I sat in the library until they turned the lights off. I walked home in the rain, my mind a blank, gray void. But as I reached my doorstep, I saw a small, water-damaged box that had been tucked behind the planter. It was a box of my grandmother's personal effects that the estate executors had finally sent over. I opened it listlessly, looking for a memento, something to remind me that someone had once loved me. Inside were old photos, a pearl necklace, and an old, bulky digital camera from the early 2000s. I turned it on. The battery was almost dead, but the memory card was full. I scrolled through the photos. Christmas 2005, Thanksgiving 2008, and then a video. It was from the day of the funeral. My grandmother had always been paranoid about her greedy children, as she called them. She had set up a hidden nanny cam in her home office to catch the cleaning staff she suspected of stealing. The video wasn't of the cleaning staff. It was of my mother and father. They were in her office, mere hours after her body had been taken away. I watched as my mother sat at the desk, practicing a signature over and over on a piece of parchment. My father stood over her, coaching her. "A little more loop on the E, Linda. That's how she does it. Once we have the power of attorney and the confession pre-signed, she's ours. We'll use her credit to bridge the gap for the construction debt. She'll never even know." My mother looked up at the camera, not knowing it was there, and laughed. "She's so desperate for our approval, she'll probably thank us for taking the burden of the money off her hands." That was the prosrenie, the epiphany. They hadn't just made a mistake. They had planned my destruction as a business expense, and they had done it with a laugh. The launch party for Ethereal Soul was held at a prestigious gallery in the Mission District. The cream of San Francisco society was there, sipping champagne and admiring Madison's vision. My parents stood at the center of the room, basking in the reflected glow of their golden daughter. I didn't sneak in. I walked through the front door in my best suit, my head held high. Madison saw me first, her face twisting into a mask of faux concern. "Aaron, you shouldn't be here. You're not well." "I've never been better, Madison," I said, loud enough for the nearby investors to hear. My father stepped forward, his eyes promising murder. "Get out, Aaron, now, before I call the police." "Oh, the police are already on their way, Dad," I said, smiling. "But not for me." I didn't wait for him to react. I had spent the last 48 hours working with a contact I had made during my audit years, a high-level investigator at the IRS. I hadn't just given them the shell company info. I had given them the video of the forgery, the video of the conspiracy. I walked over to the tech booth. The young man running the visuals for the night was a freelancer I had paid double his nightly rate to adjust the presentation. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, grabbing a microphone from a stunned server, "I'd like to show you the real inspiration behind Ethereal Soul." The giant screens that had been displaying Madison's filtered vacation photos flickered. Then the video began to play. The audio was crisp. My mother's laugh echoed through the gallery. The sight of her practicing my signature, the cold discussion of using me as a human shield for their fraud, it played on a loop for the entire room to see. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of my father's champagne glass shattering on the floor. "That's a fabrication," my mother shrieked, her voice hitting a register of pure panic. "It's a forensic original, Mom," I said into the mic, "complete with metadata and a timestamp from the day you buried your own mother." The front doors burst open. It wasn't the local police. It was federal agents. My father tried to run through the kitchen, but they were already there. They handcuffed him in front of the silent, horrified crowd. My mother was taken next, her silk dress fluttering as she was led away in tears. Madison was left standing on the stage, her brand dying in the span of 30 seconds. She looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. "What about my peace of mind, Aaron?" she whimpered. I walked up to her, took the champagne glass from her trembling hand, and set it on the edge of the stage. "Consider this my final charitable contribution," I whispered. The aftermath was a whirlwind. With the video evidence, the power of attorney was vacated, the confession was proven a forgery, and the inheritance was returned to me with interest from the seized assets. Turner Development was liquidated to pay back the millions in stolen pensions. My father and mother are currently serving 7 years in a federal facility for wire fraud and conspiracy. Madison? She's working at a dry cleaner's in a town where nobody knows her name. She finally learned the value of $1, though I doubt she'll ever understand the value of a sister. I moved to a new office last week. It's small, but it's mine. The sign on the door reads, Turner Financial. As I sit at my desk, looking out at the bay, I think back to that dinner in Palo Alto. They wanted peace of mind at the cost of my life. Instead, they got the truth. And the truth has a funny way of settling all debts in full.